The Grand Hall of the African Union Summit in Addis Ababa shimmered with the glow of polished chandeliers and the buzz of dozens of world leaders. Cameras whirred, pens scratched against notepads, and translators whispered into headsets as the historic gathering prepared to begin. The summit's theme was sovereignty and economic renewal, but everyone in the room knew the true tension rested on one man from Paris and one from Ouagadougou. Emmanuel Macron, dressed in his sharp-tailored suit, represented centuries of French presence in Africa. Across from him, Ibrahim Traoré, the young captain turned head of state, wore his military uniform with pride. His posture radiated discipline, but his eyes carried something stronger, defiance. The moderator introduced the session on partnerships in Africa's future. Macron leaned forward, smiling politely, though his words carried a weight that silenced the hall. France still holds the keys, he said slowly, letting the sentence echo through the microphones. Keys to finance, to development, to security. Without our partnership, much of Africa would struggle to survive in the global order. A few European delegates nodded in quiet agreement, while some African leaders shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But Traoré didn't flinch. His hands rested calmly on the desk, yet his presence seemed to grow larger with each second. When he spoke, his voice was steady but powerful, cutting through the silence. Africa has its own doors, he said, each word deliberate. And we no longer need anyone's keys to open them. The hall erupted into murmurs. Some gasped. Others clapped. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail, Macron's tightening jaw, Traoré's unwavering stare. This wasn't just a debate about policies. It was a collision of two worlds, one clinging to its legacy of control, the other rising to reclaim its dignity. The moderator's smile froze, unsure whether to smooth the moment or let it burn. Macron chose for him. He lifted his chin, tone measured, almost paternal. Doors, Captain? Doors you speak of were engineered with our capital, protected by our security partnerships, and connected by our markets. Keys are not trophies, they are responsibilities. A few diplomats murmured approval. A French aide scribbled responsibilities on a card and slid it forward like a cue. Traoré didn't reach for his mic. He waited, counting the seconds the way soldiers count their breaths before a breach. Responsibilities, he echoed at last, voice quiet enough to make people lean in, that somehow always unlock vaults, not clinics. The line sliced the air. Macron's hand paused above his notes. You speak of finance, Traoré continued, yet the CFA franc still pegs our veins to Paris. You speak of security, while our villages glow at night with the fire of conflicts that feed contractors. You speak of development, and I see roads that run only one way. Outward, toward ports that carry our wealth away. Macron smiled thinly. And without those roads? We still walk, Traoré said, and this time the path returns to our own fields. A ripple moved through the African rows, approval in small, contained gestures, a tapped pen, a nod, a lifted brow. Journalists typed faster. Macron shifted to policy. France has forgiven debts, funded schools, trained forces. If you discard a partner, you inherit his tasks. Are you prepared to stabilize Sahel corridors alone? To finance grids without European bonds? To protect your miners when terror cells reawaken? Traoré's gaze didn't waver. We are prepared to pay the full price of sovereignty, he said. Because we have already paid the full price of dependence. He opened a folder, not for show, but with a mechanic's precision. Community solar in Kaya. Wheat mills in Bobo. Rail spurs mapped to regional trade, not colonial ports. Contracts published, no secrets, no kickbacks. And uranium? If it leaves our soil, it will do so at a price set by daylight, not by dim rooms in distant capitals. Cameras sought Macron's eyes. He blinked once, slow. Idealism, he said softly, has a short shelf life. Then let us eat it fresh, Traoré replied. Before it rots into cynicism. The hall did not erupt. It inhaled, long, collective, bracing. Somewhere in the press tier, a single clap started, then stopped, as if even applause feared choosing a side too soon. The moderator finally found his voice. Gentlemen, perhaps specifics. Gladly, Traoré said, already turning the metaphor into math. Let's start with the keys, who forged them, and at whose expense. The moderator gestured to the projection screen. Traoré nodded once, and his aides moved swiftly. Charts flashed up, not glossy animations but raw tables, tonnage of gold exports, uranium flows, cotton yields. Lines in red tracked value leaving West Africa. Lines in blue marked what returned as aid. The imbalance screamed louder than any speech. Here are your keys, Traoré said evenly. Forged in our mines, smelted in our rivers, sold through your banks. You call them development, but they unlock vaults in Paris and Brussels more than homes in Ouagadougou. A murmur spread. Macron leaned back, fingers laced, eyes narrowing like a teacher tolerating a student's rebellion. Selective data, he said. You ignore how much France invests. Schools, clinics, infrastructure. Traoré cut in, not with anger but precision. Then let us audit them, publicly. Show us every euro spent, and how much of it circled back to French firms. Let us see how many aid contracts returned to the same companies that wrote them. The French president exhaled slowly, as if restraining irritation. Transparency is noble, Captain. But geopolitics is not run on purity. Nations survive by compromise. And nations die by compromise, Traoré answered. Every treaty signed with our neck bent has bent our people lower. Every compromise written in foreign ink has cost us sovereignty. A ripple of applause dared to emerge this time, small but steady, from the West African delegation. Macron's aides whispered frantically, feeding him lines. He ignored them, eyes locked on Traoré. You speak as though independence is a switch, Macron said. But interdependence is reality. Cut the cord too fast, and economies collapse. Trade halts. Security unravels. Perhaps, Traoré said. He leaned forward, voice sharpened. But collapse is preferable to chains. Collapse we can rebuild. Chains we cannot. The hall tightened again, suspended between two visions, the seasoned statesman warning of chaos, and the soldier president promising rebirth. Cameras zoomed close, framing the moment like history itself. Macron adjusted his tie, speaking now not to Traoré but to the hall. His voice projected the calm assurance of a man used to diplomacy. Africa's youth dream of opportunity, he said, but dreams require scaffolding. Security corridors, foreign investment, defense cooperation, these are the keys that prevent instability. He turned briefly to face Traoré. You call them chains. I call them structure. The phrase landed smoothly, crafted for headlines. Some nodded, others frowned. Traoré leaned into the microphone, his eyes scanning the chamber before resting on Macron. Structure, he asked. The structure of a house matters only if the people inside are free to move. What use is scaffolding if it cages the very ones it claims to support? He opened a folder, sliding a document across the table. This, he said, tapping the paper, is a contract signed in 1970. France guaranteed security for our mines. In exchange, 80% of revenue flowed to French companies. 50 years later, new agreements dress the same numbers in fresh ink. If this is structure, it is scaffolding built to reach only your windows. The audience stirred. Macron kept his composure, though the muscles in his jaw tightened. History cannot be rewritten, Captain, he said. No, Traoré replied, his voice firmer now, but the future can be. He straightened, shoulders squared. We will not burn bridges with France. But neither will we walk across them with heads bowed. Africa is not a tenant. We are landlords of our own destiny. The hall erupted into applause, louder this time, carried by younger delegates, activists, and journalists. Macron's aides whispered, but he waved them off, his gaze fixed on Traoré. For the first time that day, the French president's smile faltered. The young captain from Burkina Faso had matched metaphor for metaphor, policy for policy, and conviction for conviction. And the room knew it. As the clapping subsided, the moderator attempted to regain control. Gentlemen, let us steer toward solutions, joint ventures, energy cooperation. But Macron raised his hand lightly, signaling he wasn't finished. His tone cooled, the veneer of patience cracking. Captain Traoré, he said, stressing the rank like a reminder, you speak proudly of sovereignty. Yet sovereignty without stability is fragility. And fragile states fall, sometimes to enemies within, sometimes to those without. The implication hung heavy: without France, Burkina Faso could crumble. Traoré met the challenge without flinching. His voice was lower now, but sharper. Fragility is not born from freedom. It is born from exploitation disguised as partnership. You speak of enemies within, yet who armed them? You speak of enemies without, yet who drew the borders that still bleed today? The hall fell into a charged silence. Macron's aides shifted uneasily. A few European delegates scribbled furious notes. Traoré pressed on. If you truly wish to see Africa stable, then stop holding the keys as though we are locked rooms. We are not rooms. We are nations. And nations open their own doors. This time the applause was stronger, echoing across the chamber. Some African leaders rose to their feet, clapping openly. Macron's eyes narrowed, the cameras caught the faintest flicker of frustration. The moderator tried again. Perhaps a joint communiqué could. But Macron leaned forward, forcing a smile. Words are easy in this room. Let us see how easy they are when markets react, when investors flee, when sanctions threaten. Idealism has costs. Traoré's reply came instantly, his cadence like a drumbeat, and submission has a higher cost, the soul of a people. If markets abandon us, we will build markets. If investors flee, we will invest in ourselves. If sanctions come, we will survive them as we survived centuries of worse. The room erupted, not just applause this time, but cheers. Macron leaned back, expression frozen, as if realizing that the debate had slipped beyond his control. The chamber had become a stage, and everyone knew it. The applause rolling through the African bloc had not only echoed, it had reverberated across the live streams watched by millions around the world. Commentators whispered into microphones, cameras zoomed in on Macron's tightened jaw and Traoré's steady gaze. Macron leaned forward again, regaining his composure with a statesman's practiced smile. Captain, he said smoothly, your words inspire. But inspiration does not feed nations. Wheat is not grown by applause. Energy grids are not built with slogans. The hall quieted, waiting for Traoré's counter. He nodded slowly, then raised his hand. His aide clicked, and the projector lit up again, this time showing blueprints, solar fields, localized factories, cooperative farming zones. Each slide bore the stamp of Burkina Faso's new initiatives. These, Traoré said firmly, are not slogans. They are contracts signed with our neighbors. Solar grids already under construction. Cooperative wheat projects funded by our own people. Factories where profits stay in the community. Not theory, not applause, action. Macron's smile faltered for just a moment. Traoré continued, his tone rising with conviction. Yes, wheat must be grown. So we till our own fields. Yes, grids must be built. So we harness the sun that shines on Africa 12 hours a day. Yes, factories must rise. So we build them with our hands, not wait for loans tied to invisible chains. The applause returned, thunderous now, spreading beyond the African delegations to scattered claps from Asia and Latin America. Macron's fingers tapped against the desk, betraying the rhythm of irritation. You underestimate the storm that awaits you, Macron warned, his voice colder. Markets punish defiance. Isolation is costly. Traoré's answer was quiet but unshakable, then let the markets learn what it costs to underestimate Africa. The hall was electric. Delegates leaned forward, sensing the clash was no longer about contracts or keys, it was about dignity itself. The tension was no longer subtle, it was palpable. Macron's polished rhetoric had collided with Traoré's raw defiance, and the entire summit seemed to tilt on its axis. Journalists scribbled feverishly, lenses clicked in rapid bursts, and the live broadcast counters surged with viewers across continents. Macron raised his chin, voice steady but edged with steel. Captain, revolutions are loud, but governance is quiet. You claim independence, yet your economy is woven into global trade. Cut yourself loose, and the fabric unravels. His words carried the authority of experience, but they were met not with silence, but with a ripple of murmurs, some skeptical, some impatient. Traoré leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Macron's. The fabric you speak of is stitched with thread that strangles us. You call it global trade, we call it dependency. But we are not afraid to weave a new cloth, even if it begins with rough hands and torn edges. He paused, letting the words sink in, then added, France once claimed Africa could not govern itself. Yet here we are, still governed by contracts written in Paris. Tell me, Mr. President, how long must a continent prove it can walk before you stop insisting it crawl? The eruption of applause was deafening. Delegates from across Africa rose to their feet, clapping, shouting in agreement. Even some outside the continent could not resist joining in. Macron's face betrayed a flicker of frustration, his smile taut, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. He gestured for calm, but the hall had shifted. The balance of the debate no longer rested on him. Cameras caught every detail, Traoré standing taller, the embodiment of a new generation's defiance, Macron seated, composed but visibly pressured. For the first time, the French leader seemed to be playing defense. And for the first time, the African bloc seemed to sense they had the upper hand. The summit hall carried a strange electricity now, half tension, half exhilaration. Macron's aides whispered frantically, sliding notes toward him, but he brushed them aside. The French president's composure was intact, but the warmth of diplomacy had thinned into something colder. Captain, Macron said at last, his voice lower, measured, the world does not reward defiance. You speak as though applause will build roads, as though cheers will fund hospitals. But when the lights fade, you will find that sovereignty without allies is a burden too heavy to bear. He expected silence, perhaps reflection. Instead, Traoré's response came swift, a voice like steel wrapped in calm. Mr. President, he said, our people have carried heavier burdens, chains, wars, famine, burdens delivered not by sovereignty, but by subjugation. Do not confuse struggle with weakness. Struggle is how nations are born. He leaned forward, locking eyes with Macron. We are not asking for applause. We are asking for respect. And if respect cannot be given, then we will take it through our resilience. The crowd stirred, the applause starting again, rolling across the chamber like a drumbeat. A few European delegates exchanged uneasy glances, the message was cutting through, past the language of diplomacy, into something primal, dignity. Macron forced a thin smile, but his eyes betrayed irritation. He turned briefly to the cameras, knowing millions were watching. Then let the world see if Burkina Faso can stand alone, he said. Traoré did not hesitate. Not alone, he corrected, his voice steady. With Africa. And Africa does not kneel. The hall exploded, this time not just applause, but chants rising from the African delegations, a rhythm that shook the chamber. Macron sat back, his fingers interlaced, the image of calm but the reality of pressure carved across his face. For the first time, it was not France setting the tone. It was Africa. By now, the summit hall had transformed into something more than a diplomatic gathering, it was an arena. Macron, still poised in his seat, spoke with the crisp tone of a leader unwilling to concede ground. "You speak of dignity, Captain," he said, his voice cutting through the chants, "but dignity cannot shield you from the realities of geopolitics. Every empire that thought itself untouchable eventually learned where real power lies." It was a warning wrapped in history, delivered with the calm of someone who believed time and influence were still on his side. Traoré leaned forward, unshaken. "And every empire that thought itself eternal," he answered, "has fallen into the dust. Rome, Britain, even France. What remains is not their power, but the nations they tried to rule. History does not preserve oppressors, it remembers those who broke free." The room rippled with energy, applause, shouts of agreement, even laughter from some corners. Macron's smile thinned further. "You gamble with your people's future," Macron pressed. "You risk their livelihoods for speeches and symbols." "No," Traoré countered, his tone sharp. "I risk nothing. What is at risk is already ours, our land, our resources, our people's spirit. You call it a gamble, I call it reclamation." The applause thundered again. For many, the exchange had become more than words, it was a mirror of centuries of struggle condensed into a duel of sentences. Macron straightened, adjusting his cuff as though to reclaim dignity. But Traoré, sensing the moment, delivered the line that would echo long after the summit ended. "You still believe you hold the keys, Mr. President. But Africa no longer lives behind doors. We've stepped into the open air, and you cannot lock it." The eruption of sound that followed was overwhelming, applause, chants, and cheers shaking the chamber until it felt like the very walls vibrated. Cameras captured Macron's stillness, his eyes fixed, his smile frozen. The crown had slipped. And the world had seen it. The summit's air was no longer heavy with tension, it was alive with momentum. Delegates leaned forward in their seats, journalists' fingers flying across keyboards, and millions of viewers online watched history being carved in real time. Macron adjusted his tie, regaining his posture, trying to summon the weight of his office once more. "Captain Traoré," he said, his tone cool but clipped, "the world runs on stability. France offers structure, order, protection. Without it, chaos follows. Do not mistake a fleeting moment of applause for lasting power." The words carried authority, but also fatigue. Macron was no longer dictating the narrative, he was defending it. Traoré rose slowly, his presence commanding silence without a gesture. He placed both hands on the podium and scanned the hall. His voice came steady, resonant, unshaken. "Mr. President, order imposed by force is not stability, it is submission. Protection that demands obedience is not safety, it is control. You call this chaos. I call it freedom. And freedom may be loud, it may be messy, it may even stumble, but it will never kneel." The chamber erupted, applause crashing like a wave, chants rising again from the African bloc, their voices carrying the rhythm of drums long suppressed but never silenced. Macron sat back, his expression carefully neutral, but cameras caught the tightness in his jaw. Traoré's final words cut through the roar, amplified by microphones and etched into the moment. "France may still hold keys, but Africa no longer lives behind doors. We have opened our own path, and no one can close it again." The eruption was deafening. The image of Macron seated, restrained, and Traoré standing tall, resolute, spread instantly across social media, turning into headlines before the summit even adjourned. The debate was over. But the echo of Traoré's words had only just begun.